Halloween night 2013. I was 13 years old and just had a really awesome night with my friends, trick-or-treating and having fun. We figured it would be the last time we got to do so together, before we got too old to go out anymore. We all lived within a few streets of one another, and on our way back, we'd walk each other home. I was the last person left walking alone after we got to Jackie's house. She went inside and she offered to have me stay the night. But I knew my mom wanted me home since it was a school night. The town we lived in was small enough that none of our parents made a big deal out of us going out alone on Halloween. We were all just happy we wouldn't be embarrassed by our parents following us around all night. After I watched Jackie shut the door behind her, I started walking down the street, hoping I'd get back before curfew at 10 p.m. It was usually at 9 o'clock sharp, but my mom had made an exception for Halloween, which I was supremely grateful for. As I was walking down the dimly lit road, I started hearing a strange sound coming from the bushes right beside me. I looked over, but without a flashlight, I couldn't really see anything. I picked up the pace, but the sound followed me. It was like a growling noise, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself I was brave in that moment, I felt like a little girl who needed her dad to come and save her. At some point, my fast walking turned into an all-out sprint. I heard branches snapping as the growling turned into barking, and by the time I made it to the end of the road, I realized just what was following behind me. It was a very large, incredibly intimidating dog. It looked like a pit bull, but what scared me the most was its sheer size and the fact it was baring all of its teeth and snarling at me through the very short fence separating us. It was like we both had this moment of realization where we noticed the height of the fence at the same time. I kid you not. I swear this dog and I almost locked eyes, like we both knew exactly what it was about to do. I screamed at it over and over again as I backed away slowly. It's not like the dog could understand me or something. Of course, the dog very easily, as if it was nothing to him, ran and leapt over the fence and rushed at me. I began running, but of course I was no match for the dog's speed. I did the only thing I could think of. I jumped on top of a nearby car and started screaming for help. I don't know if nobody heard me or if everyone just thought it was a Halloween prank, because nobody came out to help me. The dog was jumping at the side of the car that I was on top of. I was praying to God the car alarm would go off and the owner would come outside to see what was going on, maybe call for some help. Just my luck though, the car alarm never went off. I was stuck. I was crying and praying that my family would notice I was late coming home and they would find me somehow. I was prepared to wait on that car all night long. That was until the dog discovered that he could hop into the truck bed to get closer to me. It jumped right in, and before I knew it, I was sliding off the car and being chased by the dog along the road yet again. The cape I was wearing started to slow me down, and with it being tied around my neck, I felt like I was choking. I pulled it off and threw it towards the dog running behind me. It flew right past. I saw a tree nearby that I thought would be easy enough to climb and decided to take my chances. I ran full speed at it, and like I was George of the Jungle or something, I made my way at least 10 feet up this tree in only a matter of seconds. The dog was at the base, still lunging toward me, but I was safe for the time being. I guess I did have my priorities pretty straight at 13 though. I was clutching onto my bag of candy all the way up in that tree. I was prepared to wear that grocery bag as a backpack if I needed to make sure not one single piece of candy was lost. I sat up in that tree for what felt like at least an hour while the dog waited for me to come down. After about 10 minutes of me being up there, it finally stopped barking and just sat there staring at me, waiting. I knew it would be a bit before my parents would realize I wasn't home, so I just started eating my candy and staring back at that dog. I started thinking about how I honestly felt a little sad for it. I knew my parents would make a big deal about this, and they'd demand something be done about that dog. I didn't really want that to happen, as much as this dog was trying to attack me. Right then and there, I decided I was going to do whatever it took to get myself out of that situation and save that dog whatever life of misery was awaiting. Part of me thought of just jumping down and running as fast as I could to my house. Maybe that would do the trick. But then I remembered the dog was way faster than me, and the couple of times I'd outrun it were just straight up luck. There had to be another way. I sat there for another 10 minutes trying to come up with a plan, until finally I thought of something. The tree I was in looked right over a fence into somebody's backyard, and to the right of the fence was a window. I was hoping that was the bedroom. I thought if I threw the whole bag of candy bunched into a ball at the window, maybe the people inside would wake up and see what was going on, maybe distract the dog long enough to run away without it noticing, or even help me themselves. I was sad to relinquish it, but a dog's life meant more to me than a bunch of candy, even if it had terrorized me all night. I also figured maybe these people would be nicer when deciding what would happen to the dog than my parents would, so to me it was a win-win. I tied the bag closed and pulled it into a tight ball. I took a deep breath and threw it as hard as I could against that window. Unfortunately, the homeowner's window actually shattered. The crash did wake the people inside up though, and they soon came out. The second the door opened, the dog was running away from the tree and toward them. I took that as an opportunity to climb down and start running home. I was able to make it home in just under 5 minutes, only to find cop cars in front of my house. I guess my parents had noticed I hadn't come home on time. I was 3 hours past curfew. My dad did go out looking for me, but he must not have seen me way up in that tree. I had no choice but to tell them what happened, since they'd already gotten the police involved. When they went looking for the dog though, apparently they couldn't find it. The couple whose windows I broke told the police it ran off when they went back inside their house, and my parents, of course, had to pay for the damage I caused to their home. I never did see that dog again. Honestly, part of me was relieved. I know some people may be thinking that dog deserved to be found and taken care of, but I'm just one of those people that believe it's not the dog's fault, but the owner's. I would say that there was a moral to this story, but I guess there really wasn't. It was completely random and unavoidable in my eyes. I'm just glad I was able to climb that tree and get out of the situation. Halloween isn't my favorite night of the year. Actually, far from it. But I put up with all the decorations on my house and scary movies all October long because my wife Laura absolutely adores the holiday, and I'll do anything to make her happy. Every year we hand out candy to the neighborhood kids. She and I dress up in cheesy couples costumes. It's very fun for her, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it at all either. The neighborhood we live in is extremely nice. My wife and I are both lawyers and we do pretty well for ourselves. So when it was time to buy a house together, we made sure to get exactly what we wanted. On Halloween of 2009, Laura and I were dressed as Sam and Frodo from Lord of the Rings. She insisted and I thought it was pretty hilarious. We even dressed our little baby up as Gollum. We were handing out candy as usual and seeing what all the kids in the neighborhood were dressed up as. It was pretty fun. We'd never had any trouble while handing out candy before, but this night would prove to be very, very different. At around 9 p.m., Laura answered the door, and instead of hearing trick or treat, she was met with a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, crying on our doorstep. She knelt down and was asking him what was wrong. But he wasn't saying much. In between sobs, he would say that he was lost and he needed some water. Laura tried asking him where his parents were, but he wouldn't answer. She brought him inside and took him back into the kitchen to get some water. She motioned for me to follow her into the living room, and when I did, she told me she was going to call the police. I told her that was a good idea, but we should also wait for the boy to calm down a bit, then ask him if he knows his parents' phone number as well. After our talk, Laura and I walked back into the kitchen, but the boy wasn't sitting at the counter anymore. He was standing at the back door. Both of us thought nothing of it. Maybe he just wanted to look outside. We sat him down at the table and asked him what his parents' phone number was, or if there was anyone we could call to come and get him. He finally stopped crying and told us he didn't know his parents' phone number, but he did know his brother's. He made the call, and within 15 minutes his brother was at our door, sweaty and obviously worried. He told us he'd been out trick-or-treating with his brother, looked away for only a moment, and he'd disappeared to who knows where. He thanked us more than he needed to, really, and we watched as they walked down the road out of sight. I mentioned to my wife how his brother looked nothing like him and was definitely way older than 14, the age he said he was. We contemplated still calling the police just to tell them what had happened, but eventually decided against it. That was when our little Gollum baby started crying. We realized we already had enough on our plates. The boy was with his brother now anyway, and surely he'd be fine from then on. Laura was still worried though, so I spent the next few hours reassuring her everything would be okay, that we'd done our part already by helping the boy when he needed it. By midnight, my wife and I had laid down for bed with our baby in his crib beside her. Laura kept talking about how successful the night was, but she felt a little uneasy still about the boy we'd helped earlier. I had started to become somewhat irritated by her bringing it up, and I eventually just told her I didn't want to talk about it anymore, and the situation was done and over with now. Boy, was I wrong though. At around 3 in the morning, my wife woke me up and told me she heard something downstairs. She felt like someone was in the house. Just as she said that, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. I whispered to her to take the baby into the bathroom that was attached to our bedroom and lock the door. I went into our closet and shut the door behind me. It took me a second to remember the code to the safe, but I sighed in relief when I finally got it open. I took my handgun out and tried to stay as quiet as possible. I was hoping my wife had brought her phone into the bathroom with her and was calling the police right now. I opened the door to the closet, just enough to be able to see out toward the door that led from our bedroom into the hallway. I watched as a man in a really terrifying clown mask opened the door and came right into the room. He walked towards the bathroom and tried the handle. That was all I needed to see. I slowly opened the closet door as to not alert the man to my presence and pointed the gun at him. In a more shaky voice than I honestly wanted, I told him, "Stop! I'm calling the police, so you need to leave right now." I don't think he realized I was pointing a gun right at him. He turned around very quickly like he was going to attack me or something, but the second he saw what I was holding, he froze in place. My back was to the door, which was honestly a little stupid of me. I had assumed this guy was alone, but I quickly learned that was not the case. I heard someone clear their throat and tell me to put the gun down. I glanced in that direction the voice came from, and to my shock, it was the boy from earlier, standing right behind me, pointing a gun at me. My mind was racing. I knew if I put the gun down, I'd have nothing to protect my wife and child. I always knew I would risk my life for my family, and I couldn't let them down by giving in to this man and child in that moment. I decided there was really only one option, and it all counted on one thing, that the kid wasn't as confident as he seemed. I shot the man right in front of me. As he collapsed to the floor, I turned around and tackled the kid, wrestling the gun out of his hand easily. Thankfully, I was right. I figured if I shot the guy, the kid would be way too shocked and scared to actually do anything. My wife was screaming in the bathroom, asking if I was okay. The police were there only 5 minutes later, since my wife had already been on the phone with them from the moment she entered the bathroom. Turns out the boy who we let into our house earlier that night unlocked our back door for his father to come in later to rob the place. I had been right when I said his brother looked way older, and that's because it wasn't his brother at all. It was really his dad, who had sent him to our house to make it accessible for him later. The father was charged with home invasion and ended up getting 18 years in prison. Thank God he's still in there now. The boy, his son, was put into the care of his mother, who was actually in the middle of trying to get full custody of him due to his father's criminal background and inability to properly take care of him. Laura and I moved out of that house a month later and moved in with her parents for a while before finding another home. We just didn't feel safe in that house after. Our son is now 13 years old and thankfully was too young to remember what happened that night. Laura and I still remember though, and we make sure to lock all our doors and windows every night before we go to sleep. Halloween is one of my favorite nights of the year. Even now as an adult, it's fun. Being a kid, though, is the absolute best time to celebrate the most awesome holiday of the year. I try my best not to think about the night I'm about to write about. But my therapist told me putting the words onto the page and maybe even sharing it with others may help me move on. So here I am trying my best to move on from a night that's caused me endless nightmares and paranoia. I hope some of you can understand why I was left so traumatized. I was 16 years old, and for reference, I'm a 5'2", very petite woman. I've been the same height ever since I was 15. I wish every day I could grow a few more inches. This Halloween, my friends decided we were too old for trick-or-treat. When we were trying to figure out what we should do instead, my friend Jennifer suggested that we hang out with her boyfriend and his friends. They were going to walk around scaring kids and doing other dumb stuff that I didn't really want to be a part of. I was told I had to go though, otherwise one of the guys wouldn't have a girl to hang out with. Then I'd be selfish if I skipped out. So I agreed. We were all still going to be in costume that year. I had chosen to be Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, mostly because that meant I could dress in a cute outfit to not be uncomfortable all night like I knew Jennifer would be in her sexy bunny costume. I mean, come on, we're teenagers. No one should have ever sold her that costume. Anyway, I met up with my friend and the guys and we set off on our walk around the city. I have to admit, it was unbelievably boring. I'd noticed over the years that less and less kids would go out trick-or-treating on Halloween, so the plan the guys had of scaring kids, I guess, wasn't seeming like it was going to work out. I was relieved considering I didn't really want to force any mental trauma on kids in the night where all they wanted to do was have a lot of fun. The same way I still wanted to have fun, really. We made our way to the house of an older guy that I guess Jennifer's boyfriend didn't like very much. He said he was going to ding-dong ditch the guy and we'd run away after. Of course, that didn't end up being the case though. We walked right in front of the house and he picked up a rock and threw it through the man's window. He told us to run, and as we were making our way away from the house, I looked back and noticed a figure in the front window that had just been broken. It was someone wearing a Michael Myers costume from the movie Halloween. Creepy, yeah, but it was Halloween right now, so I figured it was just a coincidence. As we reached the end of the street, we slowed down. I took a deep breath before unleashing a furious barrage of yelling at Jen's boyfriend for the stunt he'd just pulled. He then mentioned how he also saw Michael Myers in the window, and that the guy living there must have been a real freak, since he obviously was wearing it in his house where no one was going to be seeing it, and no kids were out trick-or-treating. Everyone laughed about it, but I swear, when I looked back towards the house, I saw him standing on the lawn now. He was stiff as a board, staring at all of us. I turned around to tell the group, and just like the movie, when everyone went to look, he was already gone. I will say, the movie Halloween was one that always scared me pretty bad, so the thought of someone who looked exactly like the psycho in that movie watching us was not exactly the greatest feeling in the world. When we turned the corner out of the neighborhood, I couldn't help but keep looking back, fully expecting him to be there and following us. Thankfully, he didn't seem to be. We stopped at McDonald's a few minutes later and got some stuff to eat. We sat at one of the tables outside. I was enjoying my fries when I happened to look up and toward the movie theater across the street. There he was, standing under the light in the front, almost like he wanted me to see him. This time, I didn't take my eyes off him, and when I pointed him out to the others, Jen's boyfriend yelled out to him that he was a creep and to leave us alone. Staying in character, he didn't respond at all. He simply tilted his head as though he was confused. It didn't take long for him to discontinue his statue-like posture as he began to slowly make his way towards us. Jen's boyfriend was screaming at him to stay back. But once he was halfway across the parking lot, I think we all got scared enough that we started running away. Jen ran in one direction with her boyfriend, and the other two guys ran with them. My friend Jane thankfully decided to come with me instead, as we ran into the nearby neighborhood. After a few blocks passed, we came to a halt as we made a plan to get to her house as fast as possible. If either of us saw the guy again, we'd let each other know so we could continue running if need be. We walked around for 10 minutes and saw nothing. Well, except for a few kids trick-or-treating here and there. We were walking down a street when a kid coming from a house just ahead pointed behind us and said out loud, "Whoa, cool Michael Myers costume." Jane and I looked at each other before quickly turning around, only to be met with the most terrifying realization. He was walking only 5 feet behind us. Both of us screamed and took off running towards Jane's house, this time not stopping for anything. We burst inside and through our tears explained to Jane's mom what was going on. We told her everything about Jen's boyfriend throwing the rock into the guy's house, which she of course did not like. We planned on reporting about the guy who had been following us all night. She actually thought it was funny that he was following us, and said we deserved it for what we did to his window. We sat on the sofa after getting into our PJs, and Jane's mom called mine to make sure I could spend the night. When she came back in the room, she was laughing and said our friend was standing on the sidewalk outside. We should say hi. We were confused. Terror ran through us as we peeked out the window, and there he was, standing there and staring right back at us. We looked at him. Jane's mom was still somehow laughing as we started to cry again, telling her it wasn't really funny and we were actually scared. She realized it wasn't a joke to us and that we were actually upset. She got her husband to go outside and tell the man to leave. He actually did approach the guy, but the guy just walked off. We thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. After Jane and I had gone into a room to sleep, we talked about how awful the night had been and how much we wished we could go back and undo it. Jane had changed the subject and was talking about a boy she liked when we heard a knock at her window. We absolutely were not about to look at who it was. We weren't that stupid. So instead, we went and got Jane's dad. He walked with us back into Jane's room to look at what was outside. He pulled back the curtains, and there was the man in the Michael Myers costume, standing just outside Jane's window and staring in. He was completely unfazed by her father being there. He just stared right at Jane and I. We screamed and ran out of the room and watched as her father stormed out of the house to confront the man. Her mom told us to go into her bedroom with her as she called the police. When they arrived, they arrested the man. They told us the man in the costume wasn't even the old man whose house was vandalized by Jen's boyfriend. In fact, they didn't know the guy at all. When they went back to check the house, they found the old man inside strangled to death. The guy who had been following us had murdered him and eventually confessed he planned to do the same to us. He just didn't expect a man bigger than him to be home with us. He was sentenced to life in prison, so thankfully I don't have to worry about him ever getting out and hurting me. That night still haunts me though. I hope one day I can find peace and be able to move on from what happened that night. Maybe someday I will. I do still love Halloween to this day, but I can't stand the movie anymore.